Hello, ladies. Hello, gentlemen, to the already giggling duo of Victor Davis Hanson and Jack Fowler. Welcome to the Victor Davis Hanson
Trump
Show.
won. I'm happy. I don't have to apologize.
That's right.
Eeyore is dead.
And never say never. Hey, welcome, folks. This is the Victor Davis Hanson Show. We're recording on Saturday, the 1st of February. This episode will be up on the 6th. Victor Davis Hanson is the Martin and Ely Anderson Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution and the Wayne and Marsha Buskey Distinguished Fellow in History at Hillsdale College. And he's got a website, The Blade of Perseus. The web address there is victorhanson.com. More on that later. Lots to talk about culturally, new issue of strategic, some Kennedy family stuff. But we're going to start off the show today to get Victor's views on the little bomb Chuck Grassley, Senator Grassley, dropped on the FBI. And we'll get Victor's thoughts on that when we come back from these important messages. We are back with the Victor Davis Hanson Show. Victor, here's a headline from Just the News. By the way, justthenews.com. That's John Solomon founded that.
Excellent site. John Solomon does wonderful work as an investigative reporter.
And it's the mothership of this podcast.
It is.
Which is also now, it's also on video on Rumble. You can check it out any which way. Here's the headline. Grassley drops FBI whistleblower records that show anti-Trump agent was behind Jack Smith 2020 case. And Victor, I'm just going to read very quickly here, the beginning of the article. Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley on Thursday, which I think would have been January the 30th, released a series of whistleblower records that allegedly show a former FBI agent who was known for being anti-Donald Trump played an important role in Jack Smith's 2020 election interference case. Grassley and Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations Chairman Ron Johnson, who's a senator from Wisconsin, claimed that internal emails and records show that former FBI agent Timothy Thibault, who was fired in 2024 for violating the Hatch Act, sent a subordinate an email that included the language for what ultimately became Smith's false elector case. I believe, Victor, Thibault came up once before, maybe came up many times before.
He did.
But Tony Bobulinski was, I think he interviewed with him or talked to him and never was heard from again.
He didn't want to hear the truth. He was the one that shepherded the FBI's effort to squash all of the evidence that implicated the Biden consortium in quid pro quo bribery with Ukraine, Romania, China. But he was most prominent, as I remember, I'm doing this by memory, that he was the point man on suppressing the existence of the Hunter Biden laptop, which the FBI confiscated, and they held for over a year. And they had, post facto, we know, they knew that it was authentic, and they not only knew that, the 51 intelligence authorities who signed that letter and then said it had all the hallmarks of Russian information, and we've talked about that. They didn't use the word disinformation because they wanted to say, well, we're lying, and we know we're lying, and they're going to catch us. So then we'll just say we just said it was information, not disinformation. And the same thing, but hallmarks of rather than is. But they were lying, all of them. But the point is that he was the person that was coordinating that and the suppression of the news about the authenticity of that laptop with social media to repress the story, like in the New York Post and stuff. So he's gone because he was so flagrant in using his office for political purposes. They got him under the Hatch Act. And that whole 8th floor, I mean, that's one of the things Kash Patel had said, and they went after him. They said, did you say you were going to fire the whole 8th floor there? Yeah, I did. He's going to have to. But everybody should remember, as I said to Sammy, there are literally hundreds of old hands at the FBI who did not like what is going on under. They didn't like under Mueller. They didn't like it under Comey. They didn't like it under McCabe. They didn't like it under Wray. They didn't like the DEI. And they are probably in their 60s. And they're willing to come back and, be his top echelon and straighten out the FBI for 3 or 4 years. And I hope they do come back. They need them.
Victor, we've talked so many hours about the FBI and disparaged what requires being disparaged, but a weak FBI, ineffective, misplaced, whatever, is not good for America. It does need to be.
I don't know what it was. It got into the intelligence gathering, and I didn't understand that right after 9/11. Comey and those people got it in there, Robert Mueller. And we have the Director of National Intelligence is supposed to coordinate, but we have the National Security Agency. We have the Defense Intelligence Group. We have the CIA. We have all of these intelligence. What we don't have is investigatory experts. And the old job of the FBI was to, when there was a federal crime and the feds had jurisdiction, they flew in and they looked at the murder scene or whatever, and they had the sterling reputation for their forensic labs and everything. And then they also helped local law enforcement, and they had a registry of most wanted. That was what the FBI did really well. But when they got into the counterterrorism, globalism, they put agents all over the world, and they got full of themselves, and they got politicized and weaponized. As many of the people should remember that the intelligence community is mostly left-wing. They draw out of universities like Harvard, Yale, Princeton to go into the CIA. I've met a lot of people in the CIA. I haven't met too many that are conservative, to tell you the truth. They're kind of like officers. Any officer who's a general or an admiral who's a 4-star person and spent a long time in Washington discovered very quickly that the Congress likes you, the left-wing Congress, because you have a chain of command that can greenlight or fuel social, cultural change. Trans, abortion, go get the generals in here. They can get it implemented. They don't have the Sturm and Drang of Congress, and they tend to make the necessary adjustments politically.
Well, Victor, let's talk about an old American family, the Kennedys. So again, that we're recording on February 1st. This show's up on the 6th. And for all I know, Victor, by the time the show airs, the committee vote for Robert Kennedy to move him ahead, or the full Senate vote, they may have happened. But Caroline Kennedy is his famous first cousin, and she's put out I think a quite vicious attack on him. And here's the beginning of a story on it. In a letter obtained by the Washington Post and sent to lawmakers ahead of Kennedy's confirmation hearings, the former ambassador to Australia and Japan, that's Caroline Kennedy, alleges that her cousin, quote, is addicted to attention and power, end quote, and has given hypocritical advice to discourage parents from vaccinating their children while vaccinating his own. She alleged that his, quote, crusade against vaccination, end quote, has also served to enrich him. I have known Bobby my whole life. We grew up together, Caroline Kennedy wrote. It's no surprise he keeps birds of prey as pets because he himself is a predator. I thought the Kennedys all stuck together, Victor, but
it's really disturbing. I mean, we all have people in our family that disagree with us, and I sure do. I think I'm the only Trump person in my immediate family. But I can't imagine them, if I were to get an appointment, and heaven forbid I would never want one, but I can't imagine them coming out and writing that. I'm surely I wouldn't do that. I love my brothers. I wouldn't do that, even though we disagree. I can't imagine why she would do that, especially given and she was almost blaming all of the Kennedy pathologies on Bobby, which made no sense because most of the older generation had worse appetites even than Bobby's generation. Talking about the chronic alcoholism of Ted Kennedy, his culpability with, the bridge and the death of Mary Jo Kopechne. I'm talking about the philandering of very young interns by JFK. I'm talking about
Grandpa Joe.
I really like JFK Jr., John, but he did something very reckless when he did not know how to fly by instruments, and he took up his wife and her sister. That was very reckless to be flying at night without an instrument rating. So there were things that had nothing to do with Bobby, and he's never mentioned all that stuff. And I noticed as soon as he announced his candidacy as a third party, remember that was when we heard the bear story and all of this stuff about he had a parasite in his brain, and then he kept trying to preempt the stories and come out and explain it. That was all coming from the Kennedys. So, and then you ask Caroline, what have you done? What have you done? You used your name. You married somebody who was very wealthy. Are you a great writer? Are you a great politician? Or are you just a Kennedy that people give you things because of your name? Did you really study Australia? Do you really know about the outback? Do you know Perth and Melbourne and Sydney, Canberra, you know the Australian people. That's why they selected you. And then you strengthened ties with Australia during the Obama administration. I don't think so.
Remember, on the political side of things, Victor, she was, gosh, I forget now what happened. Maybe it was Hillary Clinton. Why was there a New York Senate seat open? But she was talked about as the person to be appointed.
That was good to remind me. Remember that interview with her? Within 10 minutes of her interview, the sympathetic interview was basically saying, we got to stop this, because if you open your mouth one more time, you're going to confirm that you're an idiot. And she didn't know anything. Remember that? She couldn't even articulate an answer. I was really shocked by that. I thought, wow. You grew up in a political family. You went to all these finishing schools. You must have had an education. But she knew nothing. And so that was the end of her political aspirations.
Yeah.
The Kennedy family, your other question, is so large now. And it's so distant from JFK. That was the only president. You know, there was three senators, JFK, the three brothers. And there was the tragedy that Joseph Jr. Kennedy was supposed to be the star of the family, was killed in a war bombing accident. Piloted a radio-controlled bomber and got killed. And there was a lot of tragedy in that family, but there was a lot of recklessness too. And Bobby Kennedy, he's got one mission, and we'll see if he sticks to it. If he tries to tell the country that diabetes and obesity are killing us much more than 300 or 400 people dying of measles that don't get vaccinated. It's not even that high. If he can do that and change the way we look at, if he can do it in a way different than Michelle Obama, she just lectured and pontificated. If he can do it in a way, like he said the other day, if you want to have your occasional hamburger, go ahead and all that. But if he can do that and cut the obesity rate, and the diabetes, especially for minorities. In California, 1 out of every 3 people who go into the hospital for any cause is found out to have pre-diabetes or diabetes. It's epidemic among the Hispanic community. It really is, the immigrant community. And he could do a great service. And something's wrong with HHS. The guy who's there is just a joke I don't even know who he is. He's from California.
Is he from California?
Yeah, he's a Hispanic guy. He hasn't done anything. All I remember is that, he's very left-wing. And it's kind of I don't know. There are the elements underneath that are very important. CDC, NIH, FDA,
Medicare.
And you've got Dr. Oz on that one. You've got Jay on the NIH, and you've got, I'm trying to remember who the CDC's. Oh, is it Marty Makary? He's the either the FDA or CDC. And I'm hoping Scott Atlas, they haven't used him yet, but he would be a wonderful scientific advisor. Every president has a science advisor.
Right.
Scott is his great strength. He's blunt and he's candid, and he'll tell anybody the truth. And sometimes that rubs people the wrong way. And maybe where he really belongs is attached to the White House, where Trump can say, Scott, because he's got a photographic memory. I've known him for 20 years. He's a colleague of mine, and he's extremely bright and extremely knowledgeable. So he would be the type person if Trump said, look, what's the deal on the mRNA vaccination? What do we do? What is it on? Can you find something about AI? He has contacts with all the people in Silicon. He would be wonderful, and he wouldn't be out in the public very much. He'd just be a good advisor for the president as a tech science advisor, medical advisor. I hope something like that would emerge for him, because he's a talent that hasn't been used yet, and he's very pro-Trump.
Well, I've got to follow up on that. Scott Atlas and Jay, Scott, boy, oh boy, he'd been to hell and back again. Does
Both
he
of them
want
have,
to return? And with Jay, I'm just curious, Jay Bhattacharya, have you seen him or talked to him since the
nobody
election?
I haven't seen him on campus. I think he's just so busy preparing, I don't know if has he had his confirmation hearing yet? I don't know.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. He'll be confirmed. He is one of the most personable, charismatic guys in the world. Yeah. I've never met anybody that doesn't like Jay. And he's very knowledgeable. And had they listened to him and Scott, we would have had a different lockdown. But that was Fauci and Birx. But no, I think Scott would. I think Scott doesn't want to be. I'm not speaking for him, so this is my impression.
Right. Yeah.
But I think he doesn't like administrative work. You know what I mean?
Sure.
He likes science and medicine. And so when he was a direct advisor on the lockdown, he was talking directly to the president about his knowledge of medicine, but he didn't have to supervise people. Jay's got a $50 billion budget of research, and that's mostly academic research. And he's going to, I think, if he fills his mission statement, will stop the DEI 30%. That's a distortion of what that agency was founded for, is actual pure research, things like cancer and diabetes and stuff, cardiac problems. But Scott, I think, wants to participate. And I was thinking the other day, this is just, he would be, every president, I don't know if Biden did, because what good would it do to Biden to have a scientific advisor? You know, from what Mike Johnson said, he said, why did you close down the oil terminals the liquid natural gas? He said, I didn't do it. Well, you signed it. I didn't do it. So it would be superfluous to have one for him. But Trump is so busy, he needs a guy just to scan the cuts that are coming, scan the scientific, scan the health, especially the health. And he'll have Bobby there, and Bobby, trust me, they'll go after Bobby as you will never believe once he's confirmed. And Scott will be a liaison there, and he knows Jay like that. They're best friends, and he knows everybody. Marty McCarry, he knows him, he knows Oz. So he would be a wonderful kind of behind-the-scenes advisor because he's got such expertise. He wrote the textbook on neuroradiology. And I remember when my mother had a brain tumor, I later read it very carefully. It's an edited book. It's wonderful. And it really gives you methodologies how to diagnose problems of the brain and spine. And he was the world's expert in it. So he's very
Stanford
exacting.
is going to make the world healthy again. That's good. Let's
Stanford.
hope and pray.
You know, it's funny,
part
isn't
of
it?
Stanford.
I wrote an article once that said this was ironic that Stanford, when the COVID crisis came, they had the 4 people in the world that were the best on just general health policy and how the government should react and spend its dollars on health crisis. Scott had written about that for well beyond his field. He was an expert in health policy as he had been in neuroradiology. Then you had Jay, and Jay had been writing about the economics of health policy. He had a PhD in economics. He had an MD degree. And then you had the brilliant John Ioannidis, the immunologist, and he was the one that broke the whole Theranos scam when he looked at the evidence of that crazy little iPhone. You drop one drop of blood and we're going to get a complete readout. And he said that is impossible under today's technology, that one little tiny drop would give you enough blood, given the variations in blood throughout the body. And he broke that. And then you had Michael Levitt, the Nobel Prize winner. And all 4 of them were at Stanford, and they censored Jay and they censored Scott, and they took, I don't know if they censored John Ioannidis or not, but they tried to take Scott's medical license away. And so they took their greatest asset, is what I'm saying, and they blew it. And then they had a chance to rescind the censure of Scott, but especially, Scott and Jay. And you know what they said? It was in late October. They said, well, basically they said, yeah, it was kind of wrong, but we're not going to lift the censure because that would help Donald Trump before the election. That's the kind of faculty we have at Stanford. I taught 21 years at Cal State, and I found the Cal State faculty more commonsensical, just as good as the Stanford faculty, believe it or not.
Well, Victor, Stanford is where Hoover is located. Hoover has a publication that you oversee. It's called Strategica. It's got a new issue out. And when we come back from these important messages, we're going to talk about the new issue. We are back with the Victor Davis Hanson Show. We are recording on Saturday, the 1st of February. This episode is up on the 6th. I know on the 7th and the 8th, the great Sammy Wink and Victor will ensuing podcasts, will talk about the politics that surely will have happened in the intervening period from when we're talking now. Victor's got a website, The Blade of Perseus, victorhanson.com. $6.50 a month to subscribe, discounted for the full year, $65. Why would you subscribe? Because if you're a fan of Victor, he writes 2 articles a week exclusively for the Blade of Perseus, and he also does one exclusive video there. Meanwhile, hey, you'll find the archives of these podcasts, links to Victor's many other appearances on other podcasts, other shows, links to his books, his weekly essay for American Greatness, his weekly syndicated column. It's a cornucopia of Hanson. So go there, The Blade of Perseus, victorhanson.com, and do subscribe. Victor, as you know, because you are the boss of Strategica, issue 96 just came out, and it's on military recruitment, which you've talked about at some length before. I know you told me you were at an event lately, and
yes, people got very angry.
Get into it, but let's talk about the new issue and things related to it. Go ahead.
Well, we had 2 authors. I assign the topics, and then my managing editor, David Berkey, he rounds up the assignments, and he and Bruce Thornton edit them. So we have a team that operates. But we wanted to talk about recruitment because it's been in the news so much. And the subtext is that the last 3 years we've been short 40 to 50,000 soldiers in total. And when you look to the Pentagon for answers, both active generals and admirals and retired, you get arguments that don't seem rational. And the arguments are something to the effect, well, the unemployment rate's 3.5 the last 10 years, so we can't compete with the private sector. Military wages are almost 83% of civilians now, and that's not computing housing and health. It's not like the 70s when they were very below paid. Number 2, they'll tell you, well, they're out of shape, they're obese. That's true, but that's been true for 20 years. So you just wonder what is the new element, the new factor, the new criterion that is explaining these. But before I say what that article found, what the military has been doing, given this crisis in recruitment, rather than to have this public relations disaster keep going and have people like myself and you and other pundits suggest they know why people are not joining the military, they have lowered what they need. So very subtly, without much discussion, somebody will come up to me, well, Victor, you're just that's just a civilian. You don't know anything of it. I've been in the military 20 years. And we made all of our recruitments. And then you say, well, yeah, because you said you had needed 40,000 less soldiers. Well, it's more complicated than that. Well, what they've basically been doing is lowering the requirement of recruitment, and then the lower recruitment meets it, and then they announce to all of us, we're not short. But they are short. And why are they short? And if you try to tell people in the Pentagon are right about it, that the combination of humiliation in Kabul and the humiliation of the inability to achieve strategic results, and I'm not talking about tactical brilliance. A military, boy, when you get to sergeant, captain, major, lieutenant colonel, 1-star, those guys are, and private, they're brilliant. But when you go and bomb Libya, or you have all these installations in Syria, or you try to nation build for 20 years Iraq, or you try to do the same, you can't turn that into strategic resolution in our favor. And the Israelis are having the same problem. I wrote an article in Mosaic explaining why this was, in part. So you don't get an answer from them why people are not recruiting. Then you say, well, they're afraid that they're going to go out there and get killed in something in Anbar province or in Fallujah, and then you're not going to win. And then their family is going to see it was wasted. And then the second thing is, when the number of women shot from 2 or 3% to 16 or 17%, and then you deliberately, but you really put emphasis on commercials that you were going to facilitate pregnant women in flight suits. You were going to give abortions on federal property in red states that had outlawed abortion under many circumstances. You were going to appeal to trans. You were going to have the DEI, Hispanics, Black, and all that. Then you went the next step after George Floyd, and you did what the FAA, you started having repertory promotions and retentions. So white males came to the collective conclusion that they were not going to be promoted on the basis of their military record on the battlefield. What does that mean? So if they were a captain and they were in charge of a carrier and they had a high percentage of their planes landing on the second cable on the first try, just what you want, that wouldn't be a criteria. They would be asked, to what degree did you have diversity in the control room? How many black navigators, radio, all of that. So they were angry at that. And then under the Biden, it came to a head. We had that infamous 2020. Remember that? Is it Admiral Gilead? And then we had Milley and Austin, and they were actually recommending us to read this Marxist diatribe by Kennedy, anti-racism. And then they were talking about, Austin said that he was going to check through the ranks and find out about white privilege, white rage, white supremacy. And they did. They ran a witch hunt. And then in December in 2023, they did like a little peep. They waited to right before Christmas, and the Pentagon issued it. Well, kind of, sort of, we didn't find anything. There is no organized cabal of white rage, white conspiracy. Well, yeah, we could have told you that. So what happened is that the grandmother that you go talk to, and I talk a lot of military history, and as I said to Sammy, you get these people to ask, well, you know, my dad, he served in World War. My granddad served in World War II. My dad served in Vietnam. My husband served in the first Gulf War. My oldest son fought in Iraq. I am not going to let my grandson go into that military because they'll get him killed in some far-off place and nobody will care, and he'll hit a roadblock. He will hit a roadblock. And you tell the military, and they deny that. And then you look at certain statistics. And I've had this conversation 3 or 4 times. If you say to a general, I'm really worried about the military because you guys compile gender, sexual orientation, race on every type of promotion, every type of unit, but you don't do it on the dead. But I did look at the dead. In the middle 70% of those who died in Afghanistan and Iraq in combat units. And then I did the second thing, and I looked at which particular group that you are so meticulously chronicling their race and gender and sexual orientation has not met their traditional percentages. It's not gays, it's not Hispanics, it's not blacks, it's white males. And do you think there is a connection between all the things you're doing and the message you're sending white males? And do you think, secondly, that is important? Because whether it was fair or not, you depended on white male volunteers, mostly from rural places like upstate New York or the South or San Joaquin Valley, to volunteer in numbers at twice their demographics and then to die in combat units at twice their percentages in the population. And now they're not doing it. And when you say that, Jack, it is like you should see the face of they get so angry at you. Oh, that's so racist.
Haven't you been publicly...
Yeah, I've been attacked.
I don't want to reveal too much, but
I don't want to talk about it, but I have been ostracized.
Yeah.
I've had a commanding officer I've been walking across the street. He walks on the other side of the street when he sees me. I've had one of my assistants tell me that this person wants me to knock it off. I've had another military officer, it said a high-ranking officer at the Pentagon said, you better stop it. But the point is, these were op-eds. I'm a historian, but we finally got the expert, Owen West, the son of Bing West. And he's very close. Has no axe to grind.
He's military. He's former military.
He was in the Pentagon. He was in the military, in the Marine Corps, combat veteran like his father, who, my God, Bing West has been everywhere.
God, I love Bing.
One of the bravest men alive. So he did this study with a colleague, and he found out that he was meticulous, and he showed that the Pentagon's DEI practices and their less than spectacular strategic record, not their tactical excellence, has hurt recruitment. And it's pretty devastating. And it will be much more credible than me saying it because he is a combat veteran and this was his area of specialty, and he spent a great deal, and he shared that research with us. He's published it elsewhere.
Yeah, who co-wrote this lead piece?
I'm trying to remember.
Kevin Walston?
Yes, Kevin Waltz. Yeah. So he's got really great people that wrote that. And then there are some supporting articles that we have in the issue as well. And we're going to discuss that we have on March 7th, we have our 100 people. We fly them in from all over the world. We get a big round table, and we have controversial topics. It's closed to the public and the media. And I think this one session will be, do nuclear weapons still deter people, and are we lowered the threshold of using them? And another one will be, why can't we turn strategic resolution, tactical brilliance into strategic victory? And we're going to have a lot of great things going on. We've got generals, we've got admirals, we've got enlisted men, we've got special services, we've got historians like Andrew Roberts, Neil Ferguson, retired generals like General Mattis, General McMaster. We've got a lot of historians there as well. Stephen Kotkin, Barry Strauss. So it's a really good group of people. And there's no rules. I'm the chairman of the discussion. Ed Lutwack, and we had the late Angelo Codavia. He was wonderful. And it's a free-for-all. I have no rules except you can't quote what you say, and you can't personally insult somebody. You have to be polite about it. Other than that, it's a lucha libre in the middle of the arena.
Yeah. I love Lucha Libre. Some people have asked us before, can we do another show on wrestling? We'll think about that another time. Victor, I want to recommend to our listeners to visit the Hoover website and search for Strategica or Google Strategica. It's issue 96. And I'll just say that an important point in the lead piece by Owen West and Kevin Walston to me was how central the military family conduit is to our military, and it's been disrespected and
it's very important. People should realize
deeply.
that the reason that the U.S. military works so well is that there is a small percentage of the population that generation after generation after generation join the military, and they just don't do it for job training. They do it for combat. They feel, because of their ancestors, their parents, their culture, that they feel they want to go over and what I would call the ninth ring of Dante's Inferno and fight some of the most despicable, mean, creepy people in the world and beat them for their country. And they are a very precious resource. And if you tamper with that multi-generational devotion to the military in any slight way, you're going to turn them off. And if you turn them off, you're not going to find anybody else who's willing to go over there and die at twice their numbers. So you have to treat them with respect, not more than any other people, just the same, but you have to acknowledge that that is the backbone of the combat units in the U.S. Army and U.S. Marines especially. Millie was lecturing about reading Professor Kendi, and Austin was talking about white rage, and Pete Hegseth is going to shake things up, and I know for a fact that he is going to reach out to this demographic and says, you have been insulted by us and you will no longer be insulted. If you talk about what Pete Hegseth has talked about, he came out here and did at my farm and did a documentary on classical education. But his book was being written at the time, and I was talking just for a few minutes. And he touched on all the issues that appeared in this book. But I mean, that is why there was so much anger at him. If he gets his way, he's going to really radical. There is not going to be this huge overhead. There's going to be a different type of procurement. He's going to widen the field of people who offer weapons, more weapons and cheaper weapons. And he's going to take a hard look at Raytheon, General Dynamics, Lockheed, Northrop. These are great companies, but he's going to say you have to diversify. You have to partner with startups. You've got to get more competition. And we're not going to have generals that revolve right out to the Pentagon to these boards. They're going to have to wait a bit. And we're going to enforce a uniform code of military justice. You're not going to get a federal pension and still be subject to recall and violate Article 88 and just call the president a Hitler or Mussolini, or like General Hayden did, that he's creating Auschwitz-like camps. And then Hayden did, remember when Trump was president, Time Man of the Year, General Hayden, who is subject to Article 88 of the military code, he put on X a picture of Hitler as Man of the Year in 1933 or 4. In other words, he was saying that his commander-in-chief, that he has given an oath as an active officer, and he's subject to that oath if he's still in retirement and receiving a pension and subject to recall, was Hitler. And so that's not going to, I think Pete will just say, look, he'll call them all in and say, the next person who calls the President of the United States publicly a Hitlerian, Mussolini, liar, pathological, should be removed before an election is going to be subject to 88. And if you read it very carefully, it says they're subject to court-martial and they're subject even if they're retired. And so I think there's going to be a big change. I really do. And one of the things he will do is bring back meritocracy to the military and bring back some of these families that have been, estranged.
I like that he took Millie's picture down. Hey, Victor, we're going to talk about one other thing before we head into the final section. And there's so much media stuff happening. But let's stay on political and media, and that we all know how much our taxpayer dollars are involved in some degree of media, public television, PBS, NPR, and our mothership here at the podcast, which I think we talked about before on this podcast or the previous one. John Solomon's Just the News has a story. NPR, PBS, and Voice of America eyed for defunding reform amid reported bias concerns. And here's just one little paragraph from a story, and it involves Michael Pack. And Michael, you interviewed Michael a few weeks ago on a special edition of the Victor Davis Hanson Show. And Michael's also, he produced that phenomenal documentary on Clarence Thomas, just terrific. Anyway, he's the president of Manifold Productions, and he told Just the News on January 14th, 3 weeks ago, that his Iraq war documentary, it's titled The Last 600 Meters, was principally funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The corporation provides funding to both PBS and NPR. However, after initially accepting the documentary for air, PBS declined to air it for being, quote-unquote, too pro-military, Pack said. Anyway, Victor, it's just one example of many things cited in the article about why these things need to be hacked.
I think we should just tell the truth. The people at PBS and NPR are hard left. There's no doubt about it. Both of those stations were envisioned in the late 70s when you basically had a choice between ABC, CBS, and NBC, commercial television. And so PBS started out wonderfully. Brian Lamb was a saint with Book Talk and C-SPAN and all of that. And NPR started out as an alternative to commercial AM and FM radio. Okay. Now we're 40 years later, and you get your DirecTV or your streaming station, and there's 150 channels. And if you think that PBS offers great documentary, you can get them on a documentary channel. If you think they have great English melodramas or crime stories, you can find it on Amazon. The same thing. I like Endeavor. I really like that to watch it. You can go on Amazon right now and get it. If you think you want to listen to type of radio there, you can go onto a podcast. There's hundreds of podcasts on every different topic, history. So my point is to keep NPR and PBS in a special category, immune from market forces, and the idea that they should not be political, that's unsustainable now. And then they're going to say to us, well, we are political, but we fulfill a need that no one else does, and that's no longer true. So what good are they? If other outlets, some commercial-free, offer the same product without the bias, or with bias on the left and bias on the right, why do we have to subsidize these people? And they usually get pretty high salaries. They're not subject to market forces. So they compete with local TV a lot, and local TV has to survive in a market environment, and they don't, and they're propagandistic. So every statistic that has tried to monitor their content comes out with a 60, 70, 80, 90% prejudice for the left. So I just don't think people 40 or 50 years after their creation is going to put up with it anymore, especially Trump.
But I mean, it's an important brand to a lot of people to say, I listen to NPR.
It is, and I understand that. I've been on NPR a lot, and I've been on PBS, and I enjoy it. But at some point, when you're driving and you turn it on, and it says, "I just wanted to talk." Here I am with the news, and there's a really interesting phenomenon occurring at UC Berkeley campus, There's a transgendered movement, but it's a little different. It's about people wearing purple hair and being transgendered and not wearing shoes. And they have kind of fused with the radical Palestinian movement in a force multiplying effect. And can you report on this? That's what we hear. And no one wants to hear it. And the group of people that do want to hear it can find it somewhere else.
Yeah.
But we don't have to subsidize it.
Yeah.
So I think there's two things that Trump could do. He can either abolish it, or he could give it a little shove and say, you know what, you are a semi-quasi da-da-da-da, and you will be 100% supported. And look, the Bankman-Frieds gave $60 million, and the Soros gave $80 million in 2020. Mark Zuckerberg gave $419 million. Mike Bloomberg spent $1 billion. You look at those oligarchs, they have enough money. If they really want it, why don't they just fund it?
Totally agree, Victor. The top 20 philanthropies in America, all left-wing. They're more concerned with growing their the bottom line than they are with distributing. But they could easily fund this. It's couch change.
And they really got into the Me Too. I mean, I don't know whether Garrison Keillor was handsy or what, but in the great scope of things, whatever he did, he apologized. But they just went into a Stalinist mood with him, remember? And I'm speaking of a person on the left. I'm not a big fan of his. I think he's talented, but they just banned his books. And they made him a persona non grata. They just took everything he did off the air. You can't get it. It was like he had tried to dehumanize him. And they did that with a lot of people.
Well, Charlie Rose got I think he was handsy.
Same thing. I mean, these people were these icons, and then they hit the DEI, and now nobody, I mean, it's for a particular university, bi-coastal elite professional class in law, medicine, insurance, capital, media, but especially academia. Everybody, listens. If I haven't done it in a while, but I did, I used to do Talk of the Nation with Neil Conan. Remember him? And then people would come up, it's so wonderful. And you could go on Limbaugh and nobody would say a word. But so what? They're very biased. When Trump first came in, NPR asked me to come on the San Francisco station, but it was a national, and they asked me about the Trump cages. Remember the Trump cages?
Sure. Yeah.
And I said the Trump cages. They had a Hispanic guy who was very radical at the border, saying these people are in cages, like Hayden said, Auschwitz, all that stuff. I said those were built by Obama. He was the first person that lost track, and then under public pressure, he had to start deporting. As of right now, he was able to deport more than Trump has because you did not dare tell him not to deport because he was your iconic figure. Now, all of a sudden, you say that Trump is Hitler or what. I was saying this, and this guy was arguing me. And then I said, thank you, get off. And then when I got off, he started attacking me, which is not protocol when I got off the air. Well, that was kind of a right wing, something like that. And so the producer called me, very sweet, and said, thank you for being on. I said, I just listened to that. I was driving. I got in my car. There was you had an advertisement. I got in. I do have advertisements. And I started being attacked she said that, yes, I didn't want to bring that up. That was unprofessional. I said, I'm never, ever going to go back on your show.
No.
I had, it's a good rule to have. I was once on Bill Maher's show, and the producer called me and said, the Iraq war is in the surge, and I had just been operated on. Got back from Libya, so I was really ill. And she said, if you go on, I said, I don't want to go on Bill Maher. I know what that was when he was hate Bush, and he had Gandalf on, Ian McClellan, and he had another left-wing guy, I can't remember. And I said, it'll just,
McClellan.
So they said, no, Bill, he's disinterested. He wants just to see what the surge is like. And I got on there, and he said, here's Victor Hanson. He's out in Fresno. He's a Chinese war guru. And then Gandalf said, I can't believe he's a professor. Hear that. No professor. He's not a legitimate. And it was just vitriol. And I just said to the person, I'm never, ever going to go on that show again.
Yeah.
And I never have. I've been asked once or twice. I'm never going to go on that show. It's good to do that just because you know what they are. And I did the New Yorker magazine, Isaac Choitiner, and he did this, and he said he was going to have a transcript, and I could look at to check whether he was going to edit it. He never sent me the transcript. He did not tell the truth. He cut and pasted. He didn't. Anyway, I said, I'll never go to the New Yorker again. I'll never talk to you, because he did the same thing to Michael Oren. What?
Yeah, we were both misquoted in the New Yorker, the piece about Sarah Palin.
Yes, I was too. And the New York Times, I used to write op-eds, and they did the same thing to me. The other day, a guy named Baker called me for a quote about Trump, and I said to him, he had done that before, and I don't know if he remembers, but I said, I don't want the editorialized. He said, no. So he wrote, no, we just want to just give me a quote. So I said about the Biden-Trump transition and whether Trump has exceeded his constitutional authority. So last week or the week before, I said, Joe Biden vastly expanded the prerogatives of the presidency to enact by executive order policies that were unpopular. Donald Trump inherited that new ability to enact policies that were popular, like the border closing. He broke his word. He printed that, and then right underneath mine, he says, of course, the pardons were not popular, January 6th. So he editorialized in a way that, so I'm not going to do that anymore. And if I get a call from CNN, I just got one the other day, I don't do it. Nothing. Because, you get a certain point in life and you know who you're dealing with. You're dealing with some 20-something, 30s, blank, who thinks they're smarter than anybody, and they're partisans, and they're going to get some older conservative guy, and they're going to entice him and flatter him, and then bring him on, and then try to sabotage him. Life's too short to do that anymore. I have nothing but contempt for those people. I really do, that are in the New York Times and New Yorker.
Yeah.
I had a woman, they ran an article on me in the Washington Post that Dick Cheney was reading some of my books. This is 2003. And so this woman called me from the Boston Globe. Said, I'd like to come out. I hear you're a farmer. I said, no, I don't want to talk to you. No, I'll come out. She flew all the way out and spent the day with me. Oh, this is so great. And then she wrote this article. We can't believe that only a vice president like Cheney would talk to this hick guy who lives in this house out in the middle of nowhere as a raisin farmer, Then a guy from the LA Times called up, said, I'm not like her. I want to write a whole thing on you. Can I? And I said, I'm really busy. He said, I'm just going to drive up. And I said, I have to go speak to an evangelical church today, and I'm too busy. I'll go with you. I said, okay, you spend it. So he spent the day, and sure enough, Victor Hanson spouted out right wing to an evangelical right wing church audience. And it's so typical. Why do it? The LA Times, Chicago Tribune, that they used to syndicate, now it's Tribune, and I would send a column in, and they'd say, well, they'd fact check. I said, that is not necessarily not true, but it needs context. And then they would, about every 3 years, they go, we don't know how to ask you this, but you're getting people very angry. And we've got a lot of Stanford professors. And underneath your byline, it says Victor Davis Hanson, Senior Fellow, Hoover Institution, Stanford University. Now, I know you wouldn't lie to us, but they claim that you're not Stanford affiliated and you're speaking for them. I said, what do you want? They said, well, can you send us your pay stub? And I said, now what would be needed on my pay stub? We need the name Stanford University. I said, I'll be happy to. And I did that every 2 or 3 years. And it was always professors that were so angry to see Stanford University with anybody affiliated with anybody that didn't have their views.
Well, Victor,
I always thought if it was medieval times, I would have been burned at the stake.
I'm glad
I bring this up, Jack, because to finish, we went through this with Sammy, that they took the security details away from Brian Hook, Pompeo, John Bolton, Fauci. And I said at the time that they were distinct cases. The people who were involved for a long, long time fashioning the Iran deal and that were in Soleimani, and that was Brian Hook and Pompeo. Bolton came in later. I can see that I think they should. I don't know what their circumstances are, but I said, and maybe somebody wrote me a note and said, you're wrong. And it was my impression that neither one of them had a lot of income. and that was wrong because they would not be able to afford private security. But I did say that I know that for a fact that John Bolton had a $7 million PAC, and then I know people who give lavish amounts of money. His book. So I said, John Bolton has private means. And I know that Anthony Fauci and his wife were the highest paid couple, almost $900,000. And they were being paid by the NIH, the security detail. And it was Biden that cut it off, not Trump. But my point was this. Trump was right. Nobody gets lifetime security details. Nobody. Mark Milley doesn't. Nobody should. And in cases where they made courageous decisions that put them in danger, they got security details for 4 or 5 years, 3 or 4 years. And Trump is doing more for them than the security details alone because he is warning Iran, if you dare touch a person's hair, you're going to regret it. And Biden didn't do that. So he is deterring them. And the Iranian president confirmed that about a month ago. He gave an interview and said, no. We do not assassinate anybody. Now, he may have been lying, but he felt he had to say that. So they know that if they touch any of those people, they're going to be killed. And they will be killed.
Yeah.
So my point was just, if they have a lot of money, why would the government keep giving them security details? And then the people who didn't have money and were involved to a much greater degree in the decision to kill, so I, like Pompeo or Brian Hook, I think that they probably should get some more detail.
Yeah.
But
well,
the other thing I said was, go ahead.
Oh, the inner city mom in Chicago deserves a private protection detail.
Exactly. I said that.
Yeah.
If you're in the arena and you write stuff or what we're talking about today, you're going to get a lot of hate mail.
Right.
And I said to Sammy, I had a guy who said he was going to kill me when I got to Washington. And I printed that letter. And somebody who was a Texas federal prosecutor wrote me and said, I found out who that guy is, and I wrote him a note that was a felony. And then I've had another guy who parked out on my almond orchard. He wouldn't leave. And I had that a lot. I would say once a month somebody shows up at my house. 99% are wonderful. The 1% is not. Or if I go to an airport and somebody confronts you, 99% are wonderful. One person hit me in the back of the head, like cowardly, and then ran away. But my point is this. All of us have problems with security, and it's not just pundits. It's everybody does.
Yeah.
There was, I won't mention a pundit, but every time I read him, he said, somebody threatened me, and I'm writing, I'm courageous because somebody, I thought, no, this is part of the job. Everybody threatens you. You write stuff, people threaten you. And
well,
I get, my angry reader, I just let it pile up, and it's all F you and this, you're an idiot, and I publish it. And if they put their name there, I put their name there.
You got some nutcases there. Hey,
I
Victor,
I got a backlog. I got to get to the angry.
No, that'll bring the Eeyore out. Let's close the show, today's show, by talking about a pundit who is pulling a mea culpa, and get your thoughts on that. And we'll do that when we come back from these final important messages. We are back.
We haven't talked about this. You're not talking about Bret Stephens, are you?
No, I'm not.
Mea culpa?
Chris Cillizza, but we can talk about Bret Stephens also if you.
No, and Sammy and I talked about Bret.
Oh, okay. Well, Chris Cillizza, who was a Washington Post journalist and then kind of off on his own, he put a very long expert tweet thing. Well, I can't even know what the hell it's called. Post with a thread. I screwed up. That's how it begins. Back in May 2020, I wrote how Anthony Fauci had crushed Donald Trump's lab leak theory for COVID-19. Yes. The CIA said over the weekend they now believe this virus leaked from the lab. So a few thoughts, and then he had many
why
thoughts.
are they saying that now? Because they know that the research all along said that, but they were in trouble because people like Chris Cillizza and the media demonized. Even Jon Stewart, remember he got on, they got angry at him for saying it. I wrote it, I think it was for Salon or Slate, I can't remember. I mentioned that to Sammy, that I wrote in, I think it was March or April, of this whole thing that was just logical. Here's the Wuhan lab. Here is the first patient near the Wuhan lab. There's no bat or pangolin found anywhere near that's infected. There has never been an animal found that was infected before a human was infected, meaning that it didn't come from an animal. If there was a rare animal that had COVID, it came from a human. The Wuhan lab was under the auspices of the People's Liberation Army. They did not release all of the genetic information like they promised. People who were involved in the escape and were worried disappeared. We don't know where they are. Anthony Fauci broke the law of 2014 and routed $600,000 through Echo Health, Peter Daszak, to the lab. And not even that, he allowed transfers of expertise, visits from scholars, and instrumentation to go there. And the moment he heard that Wuhan was the center of this outbreak, he and Francis Collins had a flurry, as Rand Paul exposed, of emails, worried that it might be misinterpreted that their subsidy of this lab and their interest in gain-of-function biology, which was outlawed in the United States, could be misinterpreted as supporting what went on in the Wuhan lab. And then they cooked up Peter Daszak to get the venerable Lancet magazine, the New England Journal of Medicine version in Britain, to ruin its reputation by rounding up a bunch of hacks that goes over there and gets communist propaganda and then writes, well, it didn't come from here. The commies told us it didn't come from here. Then they had to retract that. So they all embarrassed themselves, and everybody listened to this knew it because it was just common sense. Right. They tried to suppress it. The only mystery is twofold, and we still don't have the answer to that. Was it an accident how it escaped, or was it deliberately? And I only say that because there were rumors that I don't know if they've ever been confirmed that they were working on types of vaccinations of the types of viruses they were creating. And I don't know if they came out very quickly, almost as quickly as we did with the vaccination. And then second of all, why was it very quickly under the auspices of the People's Liberation Army? And when were they thinking that gain-of-function research had a military component in it? And I don't understand that. They tore up Robert Kennedy because he had said that the virus was designed to be more infectious to immune differences between races. Remember that? And they really got him on that. I had a very close friend who is a PhD and worked for our intelligence agencies and worked for the government and grew up in China, fluent in Chinese, and one of his tasks is he reads local newspapers in China every day. And he said to me, off the record, I'm not going to identify him, years ago, and I didn't believe it, he said he was very disturbed because there were some articles writing that gain-and-function research, and he reads medical journals and everything, could have a component where they could be designed to target more successfully particular groups. So Robert Kennedy didn't dream up that conspiracy theory. It was floating around. I don't know if it's true. I think it's false. But there were elements in China that advanced that, and that was picked up by American intelligence. And that was discounted as kind of a threat or a fantasy. But it didn't mean that Bobby Kennedy just made it up out of his head and some racist.
I guess, Victor, I'm sure
he wasn't like Reverend Wright, was he? Remember Reverend Wright said that the Israelis had an anti-Arab missile that had a guidance system that could find Arabs and kill them.
You think if you can have sickle cell because you're black, maybe you could be white and have sickle cell, but there is some evidence out there of medical badness affiliated with race. So
it is with COVID, with blood type. We know that certain blood types, I think O or some more than A, and there's a greater immunity for a particular type of blood types vis-a-vis COVID. And we know that certain, people that are, there's a lot of, I don't know if they've been substantiated, but early on in the epidemic, people were talking about the role of nicotine, especially nicotine gum. And cigarettes were problematic because the tar would weaken the lungs as much as nicotine might have prevented the infection. But there were all sorts of scientific studies that talked about which particular groups were more vulnerable. There was a long article I read the other day that women are much more vulnerable because they have more sensitive immune system to long COVID. I think 75% of people have long COVID are women. And there was a big article
to the
here
rule, my friend.
And when COVID broke out, there was a lot of worry about the Hispanic community because statistically they had a higher incidence of diabetes and obesity, and those were two cofactors for COVID.
Don't say it though. Yeah.
So people were talking about this, and they were talking about it not in racist terms, but in scientific terms.
Yeah.
And they go after Bobby Kennedy. Anyway.
Well, the wrong people were talking about the racial things. It's the other side can do it whenever they want, but you bring it up in scientific.
Yes.
All right. Hey, Victor,
Wright can do it whenever he wants.
Yeah.
He can have a nose cone that has a little sensor on it, a nose or a camera, and it tells, as he used the word DEM, dim Jews. I can't talk to Barack anymore because dim Jews keep me from him. Remember that?
Gosh, what a...
God bless America. No. God blank America.
Yeah, we can't say that.
Chickens coming home to roost.
He said bad things about Italians also, as
and
I
then
recall.
Barack Obama asked about an interview in the Chicago Sun-Times. Are you really a member of that congregation? Yes, haven't missed a service, he said. And then they said later, well, that means you heard him when he said that. No, I was never there. Well, he married you. No, I wasn't there on those occasions.
What a liar.
Not that Victor, he believed all that, but he thought it was valuable politically.
Well, he made up made up his life in his memoirs, so why should he make up everything he does, right? Composite girlfriends.
Like Hillary said when he made that slip of the tongue and he said, my Muslim faith, and then they asked Hillary and she said, do you think he's a Muslim? And she was running against him at the time, and she said, he says he's not.
We can't. This is not even a rabbit hole. This is the Holland Tunnel. We can go down with him.
I don't want to go down with Barack Obama.
Yeah.
I don't want to. He's made his peace with the world.
Well, I don't know.
He's made his peace. He's got his 4 mansions and his multi-millionaire lifestyle.
Well, we've got to head to the exits, but just to say that Chuck Todd is out at NBC.
Oh, my gosh, he was my favorite. Chuck Todd, that brilliant mind on, was it Face the Nation, or was it?
Used to be Meet the Press. He used to be the poobah there. So I remember him just shaking his finger at people from back in 2020.
My God, I think of those old days where I know they were biased, but my God, when you look at Chuck Todd compared to John Chancellor, Eric Sevareid, even Cronkite, they were just pathetic compared to those old guys.
Well, Victor, so many people take means to communicate with us or about us. So on Apple, folks can rate this show 0 to 5 stars. Practically everyone gives it 5 stars, 4.9 plus average over 7,000 plus, 8,000 plus votes. So thanks, folks who do that. Some people leave comments. We read them all. I cry at some of them because I'm such a weenie, but and people leave comments also on Victor's website, and I grabbed one from that today, and this is from Allison, and she writes, Professor Hanson makes me laugh. His humor is so dryly hilarious, and his impromptu impressions are a riot. I'll be listening intently to a serious topic, and then he hits us with a remark like Confederacy of Dunces, and it cracks me up. I wish I had the opportunity to be his student, but I'm certainly grateful for the podcast. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Sammy. Thank you, Jack. Allison B. from Sonoma County, California. And Allison,
You're not very far, Allison B.
In his previous life, Victor was a stand-up comedian. He is a very funny man. Whether he's Happy Victor or Eeyore Victor, he's funny.
If you want to, I'll just finish by there was one person who could have been a stand-up comedian and a impersonator, and that was Rush Limbaugh. He was funny, and when he did Ross Perot, it was just funny.
I liked him.
Johnny really comes around. Yeah, he was funny. We miss him. I miss him every day.
Yeah, he was very kind to me, I've got to say.
He's very kind, one of the kindest people that I've met with people.
Yeah. Hey, Victor, let me just say I write Civil Thoughts, a free weekly email newsletter for the Center for Civil Society that every Friday it provides 14 recommended readings. Here's an excerpt, here are links, some great pieces, interesting pieces I've come across the previous week. I think you'll like it. Not selling your names. So go to civilthoughts.com and sign up. Go to victorhanson.com and sign up there. If you're on Twitter, Victor's handle is @VD Hanson. And on Facebook, there's the Victor Davis Hanson Fan Club, which is a friendly group. I recommend that to you. Victor's got his VDH's Morning Cup on Facebook and on Rumble. Check it out on Rumble. This podcast is there. And Victor's everywhere on the daily thing. Overexposed Victor.
Overexposed Victor. Everybody's getting sick of me. I'm overexposed.
Yeah, no, not enough.
Skeletor's got to go back into his hole.
Oh, my gosh, the Skeletor stuff. All right, Victor, you've been terrific. Skeletor, you've been terrific. Thanks so much. Thanks, folks, for listening, watching, however you're taking this in. We thank you, and God bless, and we will be back soon with another episode of The Victor Davis Hanson Show. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to listen. I really appreciate it. Thank you.